What's going down, D-Gens? Back again. Gonna talk about preseason week 3. This is actually gonna be pretty informative as far as the video is concerned. We are gonna have some picks for week 4. Hopefully you didn't already miss the lines, but we'll go over that in just a second. And then we're gonna give you some takeaways from preseason, some season-long plays, props and things like that. And then the bet on teams, bet against teams after watching the preseason and gathering all the data. And then also going to go over just a little bit of my process for a couple reasons. One, I want to share that. I've always kind of made this channel, or tried to make the channel, more of a teaching channel than a touting channel. Obviously, preseason so far, not great. I think we are at 2 and 4 for the year, for the preseason, that is. So it is what it is, but I do want to show how to work through that, kind of what the process is. Yeah, you know what? You may never be a millionaire off of sports betting, but at least knowing how to limit your losses and things like that. Secondly, though, just to give you guys a little bit of a background on my process, that way if there is something that maybe you think we should add in, something that needs to be talked about, something that you don't see other places, we can explore that a little bit more, or even, see what we need to add to it to get better results. But we'll take a look at that. As far as preseason week 3, I go 1 and 2. Like I said, bringing us to a total of 2 and 4 for the entire preseason. But we have Browns +4 as a cash, pretty much in the right side the entire time. Dorian Thompson actually started that game. I thought he was going to finish that game. I think they were trying to give Kellen Mond like a last-ditch effort to look good against the very last 4th and 5th stringers on the other side of the ball. And he still just didn't look great. But that was the cash. Jets -1 is one of the losses. And that one, actually, I'm somewhat surprised that we lost. I mean, you can lose any wager, obviously. But we got the best line value at Jets -1. By the time that thing got to kickoff, it was Jets -4.5. If you have not been listening to this channel very long, you may not know, every half point you get in your favor typically increases your odds of winning, or your expected win value, right? If you want to be a nerd about it, by 1.5%. So every 1 point is going to be 3% chance of winning. And the reason all this even comes into play is at the time of kickoff, right? Like right before the game starts, whatever the line is, that is taken into account each and every piece of information that is out there about that game, right? All the bookies, all the, the sharp guys, all the square guys, everything that's out there is kind of coming together in the market and saying right up until kickoff, this is what we think the line should be. We think it should be 7 points, and it gets hammered into a very, very sharp number most of the time, because the sharp guys who are doing this for their business, obviously they're really hammering down big chunks of money when they see a line, value, a line discrepancy. And the square guys are going off of what they see, on ESPN, the radio, whatever else. And those kind of factors play against each other, and they whittle it down to a very, very sharp final number. And the thought is that right at that time, that number is the best estimate for what should be a 50-50 game, right? So and that's why we always tell people, as far as, if you're touting, not to bet Sunday morning. You should not be making a wager on a football game Sunday morning, the day of, like 2 hours before kickoff, because all of the value that was in that line has been taken. Yeah, you can do it, and yeah, you can still win, obviously, because sometimes you're going to get heads, on that coin flip. But that's essentially what you're doing, is you're flipping a coin. And you're just saying, hey, I think this is better than not. If you take the line early, and when they say line value, they mean that you are getting it before that number gets hammered into where its final resting spot is going to be. So, like in our case, from 1 to 4.5, that's a huge jump. That's 3.5 points. That's 10.5%. So about 60% of the time, we should have won that wager. Theoretically, that is, right? And on top of that, it went through a key number. It went through the key number of 3. Now, it's not as key because it's preseason, but it's still a 3. So let's just say about 60% of the time we should have won that wager. This just happened to be one of the times where, one of the 4 out of 10 times it went against us. Kind of the numbers working themselves out. It's part of the game. But that's how you determine that line value and what it means. And I really want to take this episode or this chance here to kind of elaborate on some of these things that I apologize. I've been kind of taken for granted because some of you have been listening since I started this channel. Others are probably just finding it. But that's what they mean. And that's why it's so vital to get line value, and why typically the guys who are the sharp wagers are betting, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe going into Friday and Saturday if there's like news that comes out, someone gets injured or whatever, but they're not typically the guys betting on Sunday morning. The only exception to that rule is if you bet something Monday, and let's say you get the -1, and then by kickoff, yes, it's at -4. Well, now you can play the other side if you want to hedge, or if you want to do a teaser with that, or whatever the hell you want to do to kind of either, 1, hedge your bets, or 2, try and middle the game, especially if it's a big line move. Like if you get it at -1, quarterback gets hurt on the other side of the ball, now your team that you originally bet is at a -6. Well, now you can play that other team at the +6 and have a really good middle, including the 3. So that's more or less what you should be looking for, and why you should be trying to make these bets early in the week. And lastly, it's why I try to teach what I'm doing, win, lose, or draw. That way you can at least kind of see, hey, I like that, I don't like that, but I get the point. I get that I'm trying to get this number as early as possible and get the most line value. Now, in saying all that, let me go ahead and kick my own ass here, because the Bears +3.5 was the other pick we had, and that value actually went against us. There was the Bears +5.5, I believe, by the time we actually get to kickoff. So we lost points against us, meaning that there's a better chance that we lose that game. Now, that one was about 2 points, so that means roughly 56% of the time we should have lost that wager, and we did lose that wager. So that's kind of, in line with, again, just the numbers working themselves out. One thing that I think is very important to say, even though we do all this work, we watch the video, we know our key numbers, we know what to tease, when to tease it, home field advantage, who's got rest advantages, all that kind of stuff that's just kind of muddling around in my head that makes me seem obsessive to people who don't give a shit about, football or football betting specifically. All of that data is great, but at the end of the day, at some point the rubber meets the road, and it's just not going to always work your way. So if you are a card counter, or if you're familiar with card counting, I like to use that as an analogy, because you can be the best card counter in the world, and you can even look some of these guys up on YouTube because they're pretty open about it now. Those guys win, roughly 55 to 58% of the time. They just have big wins and big hot streaks when they win, and then when they lose, they just minimize their losses. That's how you become rich. It's not hitting 100% of your winners. It is maximizing the wins, minimizing the losses, and kind of realizing where you're at and how to adjust to that. But secondly, it's a mental aspect, and understanding whether you're card counting and all the numbers are in your favor, or you're sports wagering and everything is pointing towards one team. The numbers working themselves out means exactly that. There's always an X percentage chance that you're going to lose. And so if you lose a game that you're really, really sure on, and that you really, really thought, hey, man, this is for sure the right side, I got a winner here, and you end up losing that, don't let that discourage you, and don't let that think, oh, you know what, I can never do this, I suck, I need to stop doing this. Yeah, maybe take a break if you just need to kind of get your mind right again. But keep in mind that again, that is the numbers working themselves out. If you are a 55% winner, regardless of all the information you have, you're going to lose, 40 to 45% of the time. And that's if you are a great football, wagerer, even, again, a card counter that's a much more predictable bet. You're still going to lose 40% of the time. So, it is what it is. Don't get discouraged. Don't get too crazy. And number one rule with all of this, don't chase your losses. I had to kind of tell myself that this weekend when I was like, man, I really feel strongly about this, the Ravens game that was coming up. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to chase it, not put more money into it. We'll just sit with 1 or 2 for the week. And that's what I did. And I'm glad that I did that because the Ravens ended up fucking losing. But anyway, so that was preseason week 3. Now, some takeaways from the preseason, really just overall. And this is going to be for fantasy as well as for, betting. But Raheem Mostert in Miami is the starter right now for the Dolphins. Now, they may be getting Jonathan Taylor if they trade for him or making some changes or whatever. But Raheem Mostert is the starter in that backfield right now. And he's looking really good, really fresh, moving really well, especially for like a 30, 31-year-old player. He's looking really good. And I think that's very important because whether you're doing daily fantasy, redraft fantasy, or you want to just bet props, he's not getting a lot of love. As far as the market is concerned, that Miami backfield is very ambiguous, right? Some people think it's A-Chain, or some people think it's Wilson. Some people think it's Raheem Mostert, but there's not really a consensus there. And I'm telling you that in the preseason at least, and from the reports I'm seeing from practice, he has looked the best. He's been the most reliable. He's the fastest guy. He's the starter. He's going to get the number 1 crack at this. So whatever you are doing for individual players, take a good look at him. If nothing else, he may be a good play for like a DraftKings week 1 or something like that. Very, very cheap. Gonna have some good chances at it. And he's playing the Chargers, who are notoriously terrible at stopping the run. So I would not be at all surprised to see him have a huge blow-up game week 1. And you would love to have that on your side, regardless of what kind of format you're in. Or if you're going to bet a prop, betting his over may be good, or betting an anytime touchdown. Anything to that effect, I'm looking at it, especially right now because the odds are going to be pretty good for him, and or the price is going to be pretty low in like a DraftKings format. Secondly, Javonte Williams got to start with the Broncos after tearing his ACL and just blowing his whole damn knee up. He looked good. He looked solid. He could run, obviously, on it. Played okay. It's a miracle he's even out there at all. He does not look 100%, though. He did not make cuts that, just from a viewer's perspective, I think he would have made if he were 100% healthy. He runs fine. He runs downhill. He's kind of turned into like a one-cut guy. Just comparing some of his footage from before he got the injury, he used to, make a cut or a jump cut, get to the hole he needed to get, make another, cut when he's getting pursued by a linebacker or a spin or a stiff arm or something. This was much more of just like hey, one cut, all right, I'm downhill and I'm going out of bounds. Or, hey, there's an open hole, I'm going to hit that, I'm going to get to 3-4 yards and I'm going down. And that was pretty much it. And so he looks a lot more like a later day Zeke than he does rookie Javonte Williams. So not to say that he's not great, not to say that he won't turn it back on, and I think the second half of the season will be good for him, but just be aware of that when it comes, again, to any sort of fantasy or props or anything like that, and maybe look to play him or take that, that mental note for the back half of the season when he hopefully, begins to look, again, more like 100% of a player. Also, and the reason that I have this screen up on your screen right now is the preseason numbers. So for 2022, which is last preseason, not counting the Hall of Fame game, or actually I did count the Hall of Fame game, unders were 22-9 and then one push, 22 unders and 9 overs throughout the first 2 weeks. Now, this year, it's been the exact opposite. It has been 22-11 for the first 2 weeks in 2023, including the Hall of Fame game. So, big change as far as over-under, but just to kind of illustrate where we were coming from with the unders and how much things can change in a year, I have not really heard a great explanation as to why we're seeing so many overs in the preseason. My information or explanation would just be that, one, you're getting a lot more players that are coming in NFL ready from college, whether that's quarterbacks, receivers, even running backs in some instances. And then two, the defenses are not tackling to the ground in camp. From pretty much every camp that I've heard and talked to, these guys do not wrap up and go to the ground in camp for the most part, and so maybe they have the joint practices. So I think the defenses are just a step behind the offenses, And hopefully these are kind of, helping them get back up to pace here, because we need them for some unders in week 1. But I do see a lot of these games going over, because the defense, especially in the third, fourth string, is just not that great. They're not tackling great. You're having a lot of, broken tackles that really shouldn't be broken tackles. So that's a lot of it. And that is a change that has happened recently, where the training camps are implementing more and more like less physical practices, I guess, just to not get their players hurt, which makes sense, but obviously something to keep in mind for next year. So just wanted to share that with you guys, but also just some stats on that. Even with those numbers, we have 12% of the games were decided by 1 point, so it is bigger than I expected initially. But secondly, and probably more importantly, 54.5% of the games were decided by 7 points or less. Now, that's important because most of these lines are, 1 to 2 to 3 points for a preseason game. Most books do not allow you to tease these games because they're preseason games. Let me put you onto something here. GTBets does allow you to tease preseason. My bookie does not. DraftKings does not. And I would say about 90% of the books out there do not. But GTBets does. And if you want to get in on that, because again, most of these games are decided by one possession, 54% to be exact. And if you can tease them, especially if you're teasing, a 2-3 point dog, you're going to obviously get through the 7 and the 8. That's going to be the way to go. And I have not published it on the channel, but I did hit 1 or 2 teasers earlier in the preseason. I kind of got away from that because I wasn't real sure on the numbers. But now I'm almost positive I'm going to go back to it this third week here, and I'm probably going to be doing that again next year. But keep that in mind, and if you get a chance, like I said, sign up for one of the GTBets accounts, if nothing else, just so that you can so that you can go ahead and tease this preseason week upcoming. And I think you're going to see a lot of value in this, especially since most of the starters are not playing or playing very sparingly this upcoming week. So preseason week 4 plays, there are 2. The lines have been moving, but the Chargers Broncos under 36.5. Now I realize I just said all these overs have been happening. There's 2 teams though that have not really been giving one shit or another about scoring in this preseason. One of them being the Broncos, and I'm sorry, this is the Broncos and Rams. Broncos have really not done a whole lot of anything to even try to score. It has put in some doubt and some worry for Broncos backers, Broncos fans. They just haven't really put a whole lot. They actually had to leave Russell Wilson and their starters in there probably longer than you'd like to see just to get a score, to get some sort of offense going. And that's not great. I think the last time they were out there, they didn't score until they went up against the second stringers on defense. But again, that offense is playing pretty vanilla, so not really putting a lot of emphasis on scoring in that one. The Rams, exact same thing. They've been relatively lucky the times that they have scored to have good field position or turnover or something like that. Again, though, Sean McVay couldn't really care less. He's got a lot of new young rookies. He's just trying to evaluate. He doesn't give a shit. Win, lose, or draw for a preseason. So give me those 2 teams and the under 36.5. The line has moved. I grabbed that line again probably Monday morning. I believe the last time I checked it's at 35.5. I did tweet it out. And there are still some 36.5s out there, but you're going to have to look. I believe GTBets keeps going back and forth between 36.5 and 36. Second one here is the Ravens plus 1.5. I do think that the whole Ravens undefeated, like 24 in a row preseason, just put a target on their back. Every team wanted to come out and give them their best shot, whether it was the Eagles or Washington. They were really teams that typically don't care too much about preseason, really got hyped up to come beat these guys and give them all they could handle. And so, yeah, eventually they drop one. But, I'm going to go right back to them. The Ravens plus the 1.5. I don't foresee them losing back-to-back games here. Obviously, the Ravens are still going to be one of the top teams in preseason. They still have a great quarterback rotation. And honestly, some of this is just, I think, just kind of a chip on their shoulder. Like, man, we're not going to get our ass kicked twice here. So give me the Ravens plus the 1.5. That's going to be a pretty minimal bet for me. It's like a quarter unit, sorry. But that is the 2 plays for week 4. And then just real quick, guys, like I said, some of my process here is going over the coaching staff, right? I think everybody that listens to this channel knows that. Second part, though, is looking at the quarterbacks. And the reason those two are the most important pieces, if you don't already know this, coaching-wise, football is the only sport where, yes, you have 11 players on the field at all time, but you as the coach determine what positions are out there, right? How many tight ends are out there? How many running backs are out there? How many receivers are out there? Are we going to put in an extra lineman? Are we doing the jumbo set? Same thing on defense, right? Are we doing a 4-3, a 3-4, a nickel, a dime? What are we going to run? What's going on? Where are we at clockwise? All that kind of stuff. Coaches have got to be great at that if they want to be great in the NFL. So that's why I start there for my handicapping. If you give me a great coach with an average to a subpar team, I'm going to take that over a bad coach with great talent all day, every day. And I think you see that in the Super Bowl wins, just like the Chiefs. Talent-wise, they have 2, 3, 4 really, really good players, and the rest is just kind of okay, but they're consistently either winning or at least in the running for the Super Bowl. That's where I start. Secondly is quarterback, though. If I have a great coach and they're playing against another great coach, let me look at the quarterbacks and see who I feel more comfortable with. Like I just said, Patrick Mahomes, right? If you have a Patrick Mahomes versus a Dak Prescott, well, give me Patrick Mahomes all day. Very similar, hey, if you have Justin Herbert on one side and he's going up against Kirk Cousins on the other side, give me Justin Herbert. Just kind of looking at those matchups, because the coach is the guy, is basically obviously the engineer, right? He's putting it together. He's getting everything on paper. He's taking all the data, the stats in, finding out how he can manipulate the defenses or the offenses. But the quarterback out there is the one who actually has to execute that plan. And so if he can't make that throw, if he's just not physically capable of making that run or doing whatever he's got to do, if he can't make those reads pre-snap, if he can't remember to get his guys in motion, to get his guys set up, to kind of lead that offense, then obviously those plans are going to be much harder to execute. So those are my number 1 and 2 starts there. And if you have somebody who's telling you we're just going to go off of overall team, or I think just, this team has traditionally been better, it doesn't matter, all right? Because it's the team who's won, 7 Super Bowls in the last 20 years, that does not have shit to do with what they have on the field now. So that's what I look at. There's really not too much else that we haven't already talked about. Obviously, after those 2 pieces, you're going to look at key numbers, some advanced analytics like yards per attempt, how many attempts, yards per catch, yards after the catch, all that kind of stuff, just to kind of, if you're trying to play the fringe edges there. But something I have learned with NFL betting is if you have to really, really look and try to manipulate numbers and play with the data to give yourself a line, to give yourself something of an advantage, it's not a real advantage. You can kind of manipulate the numbers or look for one thing or the other all day long, and you'll eventually find something. But if you have to look that hard, it's probably not really there. Probably just move on to the next game and see if there's an easier find for you. Also, in the NFL season, I think I've said this before, I try to keep it to under 5 plays per week. Week 1 is probably going to be the only exception to that, and that's because you have an entire offseason to plan for week 1. We can look at everything on the board all summer long, look at all the players, keep up with all the news, all that kind of stuff. There's nothing else going on. Once we get into the NFL season here, it's much harder to keep track of that, which is why I have my bet on and bet against teams and the teams I watch, which is I try to keep it to about 8 or so. But it's much easier to keep track of just those 8 teams and make quick split decisions week to week than it would be to watch the entire NFL and make uninformed decisions on all 32 teams, from the get-go. So keep that in mind. And also, it's much easier to go, 4-1 or 3-2, or even 1-0, right? If you want to just take one game a week, and make that one unit, than it is to go, 20-19 or 21-19 or whatever, and you're still going to end up making the one unit because the VIG is going to eat you alive, right? So if you're playing 30 games out there, well, yeah, you played 30 units, but it's 0.1 per unit. So you actually end up playing 33 units. So now you can't just go one game over. You have to be at least 3 games over just to match what you made for your, what you paid for the VIG on those that you're losing. So the less games you play, the better and the more informed you're going to be, and the easier it is for you to win. So keep that in mind. Like I said, 5 games or less. Realistically, I'm trying to shoot for 4-1. 3-2 is okay. 3-2 is going to keep us afloat. 5-0 is going to be a great week, obviously. And if I can, I would even like to reduce it down to 3 games, right? And just go 2-1 because that's even easier. But that's kind of how you should look at playing it money-wise. Lastly, talked about bet on and bet against teams. There are 2 teams I want to have season-long plays on this year. One is the Atlanta Falcons to make the playoffs. That was paying about plus 180. I believe the line has changed down to probably about plus 150 at this point. Secondly, the Raiders under 7.5 wins. I gave that one way back out in the summer. At the time, it was minus 145. It's all the way up to like minus 190 now. Bet on teams. The Falcons, obviously, to make the playoffs, so they're one of my bet on teams. The Giants, I think they're very underrated, especially now that they have Darren Waller and they can play that 1-2 game with Waller and Saquon and kind of make you pick your poison on what kind of defense you want to run there. The Ravens, because of the offensive changes and no one's really expecting, and everyone's kind of assuming that they're not going to be able to run it with a guy like Lamar. The Jags, just because they have so many explosive weapons there, and because nobody really knows what they're going to get with Calvin Ridley, I personally think it's going to come out just fine. But the Jags being able to pick off defenses apart, with Trevor Lawrence taking another step forward and Doug Peterson having another year under his belt with that team, the Steelers, with that great defense, with TJ Watt coming back, with them being overlooked in that division, I really, really like them. And you're going to consistently get them as a dog because they're looked at as like the bottom of their division. So give me the Steelers. Those are my 5 bet on teams. Bet against teams, going back to the coach and quarterback combo, Panthers and Texans are on there because they both have rookie coaches and rookie quarterbacks. Not a rookie head coach with the Panthers, but first year with the Panthers. Raiders are the other one. I cannot stand their coach. Dennis Allen can just go kiss my ass somewhere. He just cannot get wins under his belt. And whether it's play calling or schematics or whatever it is, and I personally think it's a little bit of both, the guy just cannot get it done. He cannot get consistent wins. So give me the Raiders as a bet against team, and I'm going to try to fade them as much as I can. That's honestly why they're on my bet against list as well. And that's it, guys. Thank you for listening. I hope this was informative. If you have any questions, anything else I can do for you guys, anything you want me to look into, feel free to put in the comments below. Like, subscribe, give a look to GTBets and mybookie.com in the comments below. And y'all have a great day, great week. Make some